Happy morning to everyone who's logged into the webinar, our Reading First webinar number 4. And this time, for a change, we are not talking to each other and this panelist as parents, teachers, and educators. Today's webinar is for us. For us as people holding positions at homes, at schools, at business houses, at our jobs, and for us to see what reading means to us, what reading means to us in the current age of social media and internet, whether it's changed 40 years ago, what reading meant and what it means now. So we have got 3 business leaders who also happen to be involved in education actively. In fact, all 3 are entrepreneurs. And to begin with, I'm going to quickly introduce 3 panel members, welcome them on for taking the time out. Thank you so much, Aditya, Roshan, Amol, for coming on for this session. Today we have people from schools, business houses, independent professionals, professionals working on reading as a cause, as well as may have a very different view about reading in the current times of internet. And we are going to have an interesting session, take all kind of perspective at the end of the session. So our first panelist is Aditya. Aditya is a board member at Apeejay Group. He is Pro-Chancellor at the Apeejay University. He is a prolific writer and has written a couple of books himself, right from his mid-20s. He is also very actively involved in philanthropic activities in education along with his business responsibilities. Graduate from Stanford and masters from Harvard. Welcome, Aditya, to the session.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
We have Roshan. Thank you so much, Roshan, first of all, for dialing in from London. It's 6:30 a.m. there, probably 7 degrees. Thank you so much. Roshan is Director Strategy at City Montessori School, and he is a graduate from Oxford. He's currently also studying more than maybe most of us. He's still actively learning while leading such a massive school chain. Welcome, Roshan, to the call.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
And our third panelist, Amol. Amol has been an inspiration for a lot of us in the education space. It's been stunning the way he has led the growth of Shemrock and Shemford schools. He's the vice chairman and managing director of Shemrock and Shemford chain. Amol has been active voice across education fraternity, whether it is conferences, writing, and all the sessions. And we look forward to Amol's open, authentic sharing today as well. Welcome, Amol.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Indeed, a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. And this one initiative that we started about 2 months ago, holding webinars, has been incredibly received because 2 things which are missing on this webinar is and networking. Only thing we have here is wonderful conversations. So you can have a free-flowing, interesting time together. So I would set the floor open and would invite each of you one at a time to share what struck you when you heard this session theme. What kind of came alive for you when you heard the agenda for this session, An Eternal Journey, Read to Learn, to Read to Lead. Maybe we can begin with Roshan.
Yeah, sure. So I was delighted, of course, when I received the invitation to participate in this session. And I thought the theme was a very interesting theme. And of course, a very important one in the modern scenario. And as school leaders, as we are in some way connected with schools, and many of the attendees would be too, we all currently are sharing this kind of fear maybe that children are not reading enough and that we have to do more to get children into reading. And particularly in some of the questions which were listed before we joined, a lot of the questions are about this idea that maybe technology, social media, latest digital developments are somehow a barrier to children reading more. And we have to recognize that, but more importantly, my personal feeling, my view, is although we recognize that and we can see technology and social media as a real barrier, we also have to understand that it's an absolute fact of modern life. And it's not something we can avoid. It's not something that we can prevent children from being involved in. It's a reality, it's growing, and it's here to stay. So rather than trying to somehow force reading by pushing children away from that kind of thing, we need to channelize that technology in such a way that it actually benefits reading. We also have to recognize that the nature of reading perhaps has evolved. So obviously the traditional mode of reading, physical books, fiction, novels, that is still there, that will always be there. But at the same time, online, there is a vast plethora of new ways to read, of information, of encyclopedic information, of blogs, of interesting facts, of opinion. And again, the thing that we have to prioritize for kids in the modern world when we think about that is not saying that they shouldn't read all of that. Rather, we have to train them and help them understand the kind of research skills and the internet usage skills so that they can channelize that in the best possible way, so that they can take the best parts of that, so that they can understand when they are reading something which is of quality, and so that they can discern between what is good, helpful, quality stuff online versus what is unhelpful stuff online. Because at the same time, there is a bunch of fake news, of unhelpful information, of incorrect Wikipedia articles, whatever it might be. So we have to basically recognize that technology and then utilize it in a way that can actually boost reading, which can actually be channelized into helping children to read more and to read effectively. So that's my view on this issue of kind of technology, which I think is a core theme of this discussion today.
Super. As in, I really appreciate, Roshan, what you just said, that basically technology can't be taken away from children. It's going to be used effectively for them to learn, to figure out and channelize their energy towards what right learning that's available through technology as well. And we will take this up more as we move in the discussion. Amol, what would you like to share at this moment on when you received this invitation? What were the first few feelings or thoughts you had?
Um, Personally, I've been a big avid fan of reading, and for example, I think it's something I picked up in the West, where before going there, for me, reading used to be only textbooks and a few novels, and then you observe how people in the West, just like if they have even 15 minutes to, at a bus stop, they'll start reading, and it's something that struck me that how much we contrast when we go back. I mean, we wouldn't even want to buy our college books, and for us, reading in India meant textbooks. That's how we are, and a few comics which you're told in a young age not to read, and how the reality of things have changed now, where we want to get children back to reading, not only to be lifelong learners. And as Rohan said, I mean, we can crib all we want about the good old days and how things were better in the past, and now how we see parents and families even in restaurants just being there, but everyone having their own cell phones, and what's happened to the world. And but the reality, as Rohan said, that this is the new reality, and we all need to get used to it. There's no fighting technology, and we need to see how to leverage it and to get our kids back to reading. I mean, of course, as Rohan said, definition of reading has expanded to the blogs and what online articles, but I don't think we've seen a revival of the textbook in the recent years as well, where 4 or 5 years back, we used to think of that, ebooks are coming with zero cost, and who's going to read a normal book now? The print industry is going to be finished, and we're seeing that after just, there's some people who prefer still the digital version, the Kindles, but majority are coming back to the print form. And I think that's where we need to get our kids back to reading and fall in love with reading. I think so there's a long way to go, especially in our Indian education system, is because the focus on reading is just not there. I mean, it's still like, in our schools, we tend to actually eat up the library period just to cover our syllabus and say, we have to finish the syllabus, otherwise the books don't get finished, the parents are going to complain. So it's just that emphasis on reading needs to be brought back, and the importance, and especially in a time where, in radically changing times where kids need to constantly be learning, become learners. The importance of reading from a book does not come reading an online article where, as Rohan said, you don't know the source, it's not so in depth. So I think we need, as a country, we need to figure out what we want to do with our children. So, yeah.
Superb. So I really appreciate you bringing in the perspective from an educator's side, thinking that how reading has kind of, in fact, reviving as a textbook or as a printed form while online is of space. At the same time, it's a matter of how we signify and give it importance in the school as well, like library period being used not for promoting reading, but for finishing off what's considered
Right.
important by parents and school leaders at times. Great, thanks Amol for bringing in that. We now would love to hear from Aditya. As in Aditya, I deliberately wanted to hear last because we were just sharing an interesting conversation before the call began, wherein Aditya was sharing how it was for him as a writer as well to look at and experience the world out there when he was promoting his own book. So Aditya, here's two things which I'm inviting you for. One, to share what you felt about the session and what are your initial thoughts around it. And B, if you can continue sharing about your experience as a first-time writer, especially when you launched your first book, Tantra by Adi. Would love to begin with that.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. And I think for me, uh, when I saw this invitation, it was actually, all the questions triggered this almost nostalgic trip down memory lane. Is to, someone, it's been a long time since someone's asked me that, when did you start to read? And, and for me, that was wow. It's been a very, very long journey there. And, I was one of those people, very stereotypical who would, hide under the bed covers with a torchlight and trying to read, into the night while my parents were like, is he asleep? Is he not asleep? Is he still reading? Why is he still reading? And so I've had a love affair with books for years and years and years. I was one of those few people who actually read a huge number of books in my school library. But for me, from then to now, and especially students, and where children are in terms of consuming information. I mean, we are talking about reading, but at the end of the day, it's also about, it's about information, critical thinking, and, it's not enough to just read, but it's also what you do with that information and how are you able to digest it. For me, especially in 2018, when I talk to parents, I look at three things. First, children need to get the habit of reading. It doesn't matter what. I mean, a lot of people will say, give us amazing books, or what should they be reading? And I say this, you first have to start the habit of reading every single day. And it could be trashy fiction novels. That's perfectly fine. But once you get that habit, then you start to look at, okay, there are a lot of amazing, great books out there. The second thing for me, and this is something which, I learned in college, and it was something very, very precious, and I still try to get everyone to do this today, is this idea of original sources. I used to get into arguments about, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and I had a very simple way of ending it. I said, have you read it? And people would say, no, we saw the serial. I was like, no, how can you argue about a book? How can you argue about the Gita? How can you argue about, the Quran or the Bible or everything if you haven't read it? And I think that's one of the other big things which I really want people to do, is to, stop consuming the opinions of others and go and read it for yourself. Read the source material for yourself. And the third, and this has been covered for years, and one of the big issues that we are facing today is the problem of customized information. And you log into your Facebook feed, you log into any social media, you go to a news site and they say recommended for you, and that scares me, because people are doubling down on stuff that they really want to read rather than things which are forcing them to think. And for me, one of the big things which I do, and there is a thought which is called didactic reading, is ensuring that you go and find things that you don't want to read, that is not recommended for you, because that's the only way you're going to expand your knowledge base. That's the only way you're going to meet tough arguments that are going to question the way you think. One of the, I went on an all India yatra when I was promoting my book. And so I was meeting bookshop owners and really asking them, partly, of course, it's just like, please somehow get my book on your shelf. How can you promote it? But it led to a very interesting discussions with them. And part of their journey as selling books to people was them being the recommendation service. People would go up to them and say, hey, my kid is this age. What should they read? And part of how their experience is like really having to be people who are passionate about their craft. And I love online. I've owned every single Kindle ever made. I had the fortune to meet Jeff Bezos 3 years ago, and and it's a table conversation over dinner where he was like, I will buy your book on Kindle if you put it there. And it was there. And I've sold more copies on Kindle than I've sold in person. But still, there is something about, that recommendation thing that coming in where, and especially for younger people, where you have a curation of information. One of the big disasters, I think, 20 years ago, and I was part of this, in our education institutions, we put a computer in every classroom in 2001, 2002. And this entire idea was that, the internet, and the moment we have and give everybody access to information, this will solve all our problems. You have this beautiful amount of information, huge land. And as Roshan was saying, it's too much information. And I think in 2018, and especially when it comes to students and children, I think curation is becoming a lot more important than just access to information. But I'm excited because they have. If you look at the statistics, and being an MBA, I have to do the competitive analysis. There have never been more authors in the history of mankind than they are today. There have never been more books that have come out in the history of mankind. People said that, look, books are dead because there's blogs, there's social media, there's all of this. But that's not happened. And I think what I love about the internet boom and the ebook boom is that people who could have never dreamed of being authors are sitting and writing, and they have a following. You can write a book and have 1,000 people read that, and that's good enough. Earlier, you had to have a subject and a topic that required 10, 20, 30,000 because there's a sheer cost of publication. And that's something which I'm very excited about, is really getting people who have a unique voice, who appeal to a very small audience, and yet then being able to become writers and get out there. So, sorry, very, very long.
I gave you 2 bits, right? Opening and sharing about your experience. Thank you so much. And then I picked 2 things very, very clearly here, and would love to take our panel forward with those 2 triggers. First, as you rightly said, there has never been a time in history wherein we had so many authors and books. It's just outstanding number of publications that we've got, so many channels to access information. And the key is picking what's meant for you, as in, So my next question is to any 3 of you who wish to take it up, that how do you choose what to read next? Maybe Roshan, would you like to share? How do you pick your next book?
Well, Aditya raised a very important point in there as well, that, with social media and with kind of targeted advertising, you can have in a personal, like an echo chamber. So if you read something with a particular viewpoint, you'll get lots more recommendations which are in the same view, and you'll end up very fixed. And in fact, one of the big benefits of reading is about seeing lots of different viewpoints and then weighing them up and then thinking for yourself. when I'm trying to pick books, I mean, I do read a lot of fiction, but I'm a big non-fiction fan. And of course, nonfiction is one area where it's very easy to get fixed into a particular viewpoint. So my goal is always that for every two books that I read, which are perhaps in line with some particular point of view which I hold or something that I really like, I read at least one book which is kind of trying to promote the opposite type of view. What's crucial for thinking skills and for maintaining a kind of broad opinion and for not getting too down into one way of thinking. And it also means that you can understand, all the different viewpoints that are out there and weigh them up and see what's relevant to you and see what works. So it's very important to do that. That's one thing that I do when picking. The other thing I do, of course, is because there's such a vast range of stuff out there, as people are saying. I like to look at, these days, along with the vast range of reading, there's a vast range of reviews of that reading. And there's a lot of high quality reviews out there. So I like to read book reviews before I read a book and after I read a book. So before I read the book, it's just to make sure that it's worth, is it worth investing my 1,500 rupees in this book instead of that book? And take recommendations from friends and family and other people. But then after I read the book, I also want to see what other people have thought about it and see whether it's similar to what I have thought or if it's different to what I have thought. I even write my own personal review, although I don't tend to publish it anywhere. I keep my own little kind of reading log, and I write my own little reviews and summaries so I don't forget about what I read either.
Oh, lovely. As in, I'm going to ask you to share that sheet with me at least as a gift after this session.
Absolutely.
Lovely. So, as in, that's what Roshan you also picked, and that was my second point from Aditya's sharing is, given the power of internet, there's so much that hits our screen without us asking for it, which is maybe recommendation engines and sponsored content, marketing-based, notifications. So, Amol, when you're running this chain of school and internet is a prime tool for you to run the large, massive school chain, what's your view in terms of when you buy something online for your schools to access? How do you kind of manage this push, or what's your belief, as well as what's your belief around marketing and sponsored content?
Okay. Firstly, I'll just add on to how Roshan buys books and how I book. I think books are one area where I actually don't look at the reviews. For everything else, from my pajamas to my shoes to whatever I'm buying for my house, I look at reviews and just say, okay, anyone more than 4 stars, just buy it. But books is because I have a very peculiar taste in books, and I read 2 books since I'm in the business of education. I read on business, I read on education. And I normally buy from bookstores rather than buying online or at the book fairs. I spend 2 days at the Delhi Book Fair every year. My way is that I like to take things which I can immediately implement in my work. I don't like to get too philosophical about things, don't go into the theory of education or the theory of business. I want, okay, there's something I can immediately put into my schools, into my organization right now. And I have a rule in my house where after dinner, no TV kind of rule, and we all read 1 hour every day before we go to sleep. So we have a huge library, and personally for me, it's always been the book. So I like to see the book in detail. Where is it going with it? Are there actionable things in this book which I can implement? And that's what I like to buy, because I've noticed the reviews tend to be from all kinds of people, maybe who have different backgrounds from where they're coming from. So books are actually the only place where I don't look at reviews, and I have my own opinion on how I like it. For children, what I do like is I don't like to restrict their choices. I just feel that reading is reading, and when we were young, we were told not to read comics, right? We were told that Chacha Chaudhary is not reading, right? But now, given the dearth of reading, I'm okay with kids reading anything, even if it's below their reading level, above the just read, and it's okay. You don't want to finish the book. So I like to give, when it comes to the kids, I like to give choices to them, and I'm okay with their choice if they don't want to finish a book. If they want to read it again as well, even for my son or for the kids in our school, I'm okay with it, as long as just keep reading. I think that's the key for me, and I think that's what I've done for our schools. So, and in terms of sponsored content, yeah, we all have this issue where I think basically they were just reading somewhere that it talks with money somewhere and the content, and you're going to like and watch and content which agrees with you. You're comfortable with the thoughts and not doesn't go against your core philosophy. So and I'm watching videos and I'm going to get the same content, and it's just that you have to see where these companies are coming from. They have to. If we had, Facebook was a paid application or Google was a paid application, then maybe this would not have happened. But that's, again, as we said, that's the reality we live in today, and we have to live with that. So I think, as Rohan said, and Aditya also mentioned, that we need to proactively tell us what to watch. We need to get out of that comfort zone and try and look at other opinions, because we are seeing an increasing what is happening there, and it worries me as well. So so I think in terms of sponsored content, again, it's there. I mean, what are we to complain about? Who are we to complain about? We just need to understand that this is the new reality, and how to get our kids to form. So I think that's where think about the more you read offline, the more you have a more open mind, because you're not dictated by whatever you've been believing in. So you're not going down the same route of thought. You need to break your chain of thought, and that gives you a much more balanced mindset, I think. And that will become all the more important, because you're not dependent on your Facebook wall for learning whatever you want to learn.
Yeah. So thanks, Amol, for sharing that. And I want to extend that question further to Aditya before just picking two things that you shared, because a lot of questions that we have got from participants are around how do you inculcate reading in the middle school years and the higher grades, because the session today is around reading to learn. Reading is such an essential tool for you to learn. And what I picked from your sharing, three things which I'm sharing for the participants to make note of. One, when children are growing up, it really doesn't matter what they're reading, just get them to read. Two, have some reading dedicated time at home, wherein you don't, like the way you have a puja time, a TV time, you have a reading time in the evening where the whole family sits and read. And three, I really loved, while you didn't say explicitly, don't buy books online, take your kids to a bookstore, pick your own book, pick something for them, and they would love that experience and get inspired to read more. So thank you, Amol, for sharing that, and it answers a lot of the questions participants had. So Aditya, I'm just extending this question, because we came across this question in one of the panel discussions I was on at the UNICEF sponsored group, and wherein this whole thing was about how is information on the content forming our belief systems. The food that we consume decides the physical well-being. The information we consume decides the mental and emotional well-being, and how we think. It's kind of impacting our belief systems. What's your feeling about that? How can we maybe regulate that process?
I mean, so I read a lot, right? So I read about a book or two every week, and and it comes to a point where people ask, what are you reading? And it's really hard to answer, because I tend to do something which authors hate, and especially for nonfiction, is read 2 to 3 books simultaneously, and you're sort of parallelly reading them as you go through. And as an author, I would be very, very sad if somebody was reading my book along with something else and not dedicating their time to it. But part of it is and I agree with complete with Roshan and Amol on this, is you have to get out of your comfort space. And most of my reading is to discover things I don't know, and I think that's generally a good advice which I would give anybody if they're figuring out sort of how to start reading, is to really look at when it comes to information, right? I think one of the biggest issues that we face today is people reading things to validate their worldview rather than to question it. And somewhere people thought it's okay, like, look, if you look at our journalism, our media, our entire foundation, it's become very customer focused. And usually in industries and in business, that's a great thing, is that, hey, we are focused on our customers, give the customer what they want. And I think when it comes to information, however, that's a terrible idea. You do not want to give people exactly what they want in terms of information, because, you have to give them what they need. And that's a huge part about why, for me, reading is so important, is it allows you to get perspectives. It allows you to get access for a very small amount of money. I mean, imagine learning the perspective of someone growing up in another country. Imagine gaining the perspective of someone who has had a very unique life and experience, and you can get access for that for a few hundred rupees. Imagine how much you would have to spend to actually do that if you didn't have that access. Right? And so to your point on information, I think absolutely. But this is why I keep trying to push people to go to original sources, right? And we are the information that we have. But even in terms of books, a lot of times what we're reading is opinion. Even in nonfiction, we are not going into the absolute. I would not want to read a book about somebody's opinion about a book or something that has been done, but rather say, look, first read the original text. And this is where I think a lot of people, including me at times, have lost our way. When we end up talking about the opinion of others more than about really analyzing what it is. Yeah. And you mentioned about how do you inculcate reading, and it's one of the big questions that are coming up in those middle school years and in the higher education. You have to start early. And I think everybody I know who's developed a love for reading, it's happened at a very early age, and it's not by it does happen by accident. I know people who've picked up accidentally a great book, and they can name that book they went back and that was the book that got me into reading, that sort of sucked me into the world. But I think it's too important to leave it to chance. And I think parents and educators, the biggest responsibility we have is to stack that deck. Make sure that we have a system, we have the ability to get the next generation into reading. And I love what Amol said. It doesn't really matter. You read comic books, I can work with that. You read trashy fiction novels, I can work with that. Because once you start to read, parents tell me comic books, and I'm like, look, comic books are the gateway drug into reading. And I'm very happy for that. Like, great. You're spending 2 hours, 3 hours reading comic books versus watching the latest Marvel's movie. Read their comic books. I can accept that. And we can transition you into reading everything else.
Super. In fact, Aditya and Amol, while sharing on the other questions, you've answered quite a few other questions of the participants, which was 3 questions, so to say. One, what do we begin with to read? Reading, what genre of books do we pick them for? And the answer is, let them pick what they love. If they love cartoon, let them read cartoon rather than watching cartoon. Second is it important to read fiction or non-fiction? So I think there again, the answer is very clear. It really doesn't matter. But the moment you pick up reading as a skill and joyful experience, you're going to start reading for asking your questions and getting your questions answered. And that's when you will move on to non-fiction naturally. And third, we have been getting this question repeatedly, that why is reading important? And I think, Aditya, I loved your sharing around the fact, which Roshan also mentioned, that perspectives, right? Just for a few $100, you get to know so much from people's experiences from different contexts that they have written those books. So I really love that. I think the key outcome that you can expect from reading is get to know so much about new perspectives. Just to continue our thread on what both of you, Amol and Aditya, shared about reading impacting our belief systems, one of the things we are observing is when you are picking books or long form articles to read, in your perspective. But what sponsored content typically means is when you have these 100-word flash coming on your WhatsApp screen and your Facebook screen, wherein you really don't know the original source from where it is coming. You really don't know what's the complete picture because it's just 100 words. Uh, and I think that's where a lot of people are struggling, because even though it's a matter of concern for me, let's say there was all this rumor around Maggie and people stopped eating Maggie, and suddenly we had Maggie out of shelves. But how many people actually went below to understand, read the opinions, figure out research on the chemicals that were flashing, even though it was of concern for every mom in the house? Every mom was struggling to manage their kids not being served Maggie. So I think that's where we as Stones to Milestones feel that it's very important to skill yourself in reading. And I'm adding to that what the panelists have shared, that for building will in the middle school and the adult years, just start reading whatever you love reading. It doesn't matter it's a fiction or a non-fiction. Thank you so much for actually relieving a lot of our participants from the fact that reading is about anything and not just something that matters always. One thing which I'm picking from all three of you, you three seem to be doing so much in your day-to-day lives. You're running enterprises, massive organizations, large teams, and still, instead of just reading a book on one question, you're reading multiple books on a question. I wonder, how do you discipline yourself and find time to read so much? Are you working enough at your organizations, or you're reading more than that?
I'll take that, Kavish. Look, for me, reading is such a big part of my life that I have to have a strategy around it. Again, I don't, but I believe reading is so important in my life that you can't just leave it to chance. And Amol mentioned about bookshops, and one of the big nostalgia things. So I come from a very conservative family, so my parents would very, very strictly sort of look at how much money we are spending on anything. And it was always a question that we asked. You spent money on this. Why? What was the value addition, right? And the only time where we didn't have a budget was when we were at a bookstore. and so when you walk in, you're like, you want to buy one book, 10 books, doesn't matter. As long as you read those books, we are going to be very happy with that. For me, I travel a lot. And I must admit, ebooks have really, really changed the way I read. Like I said, I've owned every single Kindle since they came out, and you take it in sips. Yes, I love it when I have a nice 7-8 hours long flight where I can finish a book or two, and that happens about every week. But for me, it's also every 10-20 minutes. I have engineered the book so I have it on my phone, I have it on my e-reader, and I keep sipping. So it's I get 10 minutes, I'm waiting in line for something, great, let's read. I am, a meeting is late, I'm waiting for someone, great, let's read. So that constant sipping of information in a strategic manner, I think ends up working for me very well. And so people who know me ask the same thing. It's like, you seem always busy and yet you're claiming that you read a book or two every week. It's this sipping. I don't have a reading time where I sit per day. I wish I did. But for me, it's a constant in life. So, if you'll see me at some point, I'll be on my phone, but I won't be checking my WhatsApp message. I'll be actually having the Kindle e-reader there, trying to finish up a book that I think adds great value to what I'm doing that week.
Yeah. Anything that Roshan or Amol you would like to add to that?
Yeah.
I'm actually, Aditya, Roshan, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right, thanks. So I'm actually on the other perspective. I'm completely not un-Aditya on this. Neither the marathon 7-hour flight works for me. I just can't get myself to. I'd watch a movie. I'm tired. I want to sleep. I want to have some business the next day. And neither of those small sips. I mean, sips are for my checking my whatever else going back in the office for that. Because maybe that's the way I am. I like to have a chain of thought, and I cannot take those little sips. If I'm reading a business book or a business book on education, I need to know where I'm going from and am I going, where am I coming from? I need, okay, what, I just flip back a few pages. I fold the corners, I underline. And that's why I think for me, doing that on a Kindle is very painful, going back and forth between pages. So that's why I like the physical book where I can make my notes. So that's why we've had this rule in a house where after dinner, no TV kind of thing. So 1 hour I get. And Kavish, think that, I mean, it's as Aditya also said, we're learning not from others. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? That's what reading is about. You're learning from people who've done it, been there. Why should I bother making mistakes and learning? What's the big deal? I mean, I'll be a fool to say, okay, I know everything, or let me make the mistakes and I'll learn from that. Why not just see what's out there, what's happening, what are best practices, what are these gurus talking about, even if it's their opinion. And I would take multiple perspectives on the same issue, because ultimately I have to, as a MD of Shemrock, I need to be responsible for the decision I make, which is going to impact thousands of kids' lives. So I need to be very, very confident of that. So as you know, Aditya was mentioning, it could be an opinion. So if it's just an opinion, I make a decision based on just one person's opinion, it could be very detrimental for the group as well. So I need to have different perspectives, then take a step back, maybe sit for 5 minutes, just go back to my notes or whatever I've done, and try to compile my thought, okay, this is how we're going to take this forward. And I think, for example, the franchise network in education is not something which has been done for 100 years. It's something different. How do you maintain quality while growing? What kind of, everything is changing so updated with what's happening. And for me, that's, I don't know, apart from reading, where I'm going to get all this information. So it's as necessary as spending an hour in the office. I think for me personally, the productivity is much higher when I'm reading. But so I would love it if I could do what Aditya does, sip it and use my time. You know, I mean, I see guys, you know, in the washroom they're reading and all, but I just cannot do that. I mean, I'm not that. I need my space. I need my light. I need my book in front of me, and my family knows now. You know, they've got in the habit of reading as well. And I think one more thing about kids reading in the middle school, I just like to add on one point. The best way forward is, if the educators who are listening in, is inspire children to read. I mean, read aloud small books. And I've seen so many times when I ask kids, what's your favorite book? And a lot of them mention the same book, which was the one a particular teacher came to the class and said, you know what, I'm reading this book, and let's read aloud the first chapter. And suddenly they get interested in that. And I think that's a way to get kids started into reading as well. And not just say, okay, read whatever you want. Of course, you can take them to the book fairs, the bookstores as well. They must go and let them pick what they choose. But it's also about giving directions, because a lot of times children tend to get stuck in a particular genre only. So if they're doing comics, they're just doing comics. And also if they're doing as you said, the Avenger comics, push them towards at least Wimpy Kid as well, or Big Nate, and try to get them into bigger textbooks as well. And from there, you know, you want to push them into something more inspiring. So from fiction to maybe self-improvement, or so once you start talking to them, read aloud, and that can be done by teachers as well, if there's schools over here, or it can be done by parents at home as well. These schools are not doing it. And it really gets the children inspired to say, okay, fine. Now the curiosity is built up. They want to know what happens next. And they do pick up books. And I think that's, for me, I think one of the things that I've used in our schools to encourage reading a lot.
So I actually feel like summarizing the two of you, and I'm going to make a note for myself on reading, is that sip like Aditya and take deep dips like Amol when reading. And Roshan, you want to share something on this?
Yeah, I'd say I'm somewhere in between Aditya and Amol. I mean, I personally feel that, you know, however busy you are, if you love something, you make time for it. You know, just like we all make time for our families, so we all make time for reading as well. You just squeeze out that time wherever you can. And I'm with Amol on the idea that I can't really sip. I need a chunk of time, not a big chunk of time, but I'd say minimum kind of 20, 25 minutes before I sit down. I'm not going to read in 5-10 minute bursts. I like to sit down with my book. But having said that, you know, you do have to carve out time wherever you can. I travel a lot, so I do a lot of reading while I'm traveling. I'm like Aditya in that way, and I can do a kind of 7-hour reading stint. But apart from that, also, I have this feeling that reading is a crucial part of who I am, what enables me to do the work I do, what enables me to keep learning and be successful in my work. So I view it as a crucial activity. If I'm not reading, I think I'm not self-improving and I'm not able to do that. If you get really into a good book as well, then sometimes you end up all day at work thinking, I want to get home and read that book, you're like a whole day around that book. And then one other little time-saving tool I've found, which is necessary because sometimes, work is, managing big school chains, you can be at work for 15, 16 hours a day. So just continuously working from waking till sleeping. So I have discovered one tool which I would recommend to people who really don't have any time. Audiobooks. You have to be careful with audiobooks because you really have to concentrate when you're listening, otherwise it doesn't go in. And with fiction, with heavy, dense stuff, it doesn't suit itself. But for light fiction, if you've already mastered kind of reading physical books, then I think it's safe to progress to audiobooks. And audiobooks you can sit and you can kind of squeeze it in around whenever your ears are free and your mind is free, but you're doing anything else, you can listen to audiobooks. So I listen to audiobook while I'm getting ready in the morning, while I'm brushing my teeth, when I'm at the gym, when I'm in the car, if ever I'm eating a meal on my own somewhere, having a working lunch, something like that. That's the you can put an audiobook on, and then you can keep up the reading habit that way, even if you're literally at a job that you're kind of at work from the moment you wake to the moment you sleep, you still get that reading in.
Super. What I really picked up, Roshan, and one of the things that I'm also answering a question we received around audiobooks is what you're sharing is audiobooks is not a substitute for people who can't read printed books. Audiobooks you're recommending for people who are already quite proficient in their reading audiobooks. Otherwise, it's going to be counterproductive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's like you need to write by hand before you type. You need to walk before you run. So I think, you need to master the art of reading properly, on a physical paper book or at least on a screen, physical words. Only then can you start substituting audiobooks in.
Lovely. So the next thing that I would love to pick from all three of you is, as school leaders, educational institute leaders, you would be recommending books to your respective school chain leaders, as in your principals and teachers. If you could, each of you could share a few recommendations for school leaders and teachers, the two buckets, as in, I'm assuming for leaders, you may have a different recommendation and for teachers a different. So if each of you can give few names, that will be very helpful. Aditya, maybe if you wish to.
Sure. So one of my, I write on LinkedIn once in a while, and, one of my most popular posts is actually sort of a list of philosophy books that every business leader should read. And I highly recommend people go through that. For me, two or three particular books, which I think, and again, going off to my entire thing about, original texts matter. And for me, I think the three books which I recommend, simply A, they're amazing, and B, for some reason, very few people read them in India. This is something which sort of, drives me a little bit crazy. The first is absolutely On Liberty by John Stuart Mills. I think it's sort of the foundation of how people think about personal freedoms and liberties. And, it drives me crazy. I see, people arguing on the news about, personal freedoms and liberty. And I'm like, you haven't read this book. It really gives one of those foundations that I absolutely have. The second one is Sir Francis Bacon's The New Instrument of Science. It is, I talk to science teachers who haven't read this book. And I said, look, you have to understand how the scientific method came out. And I think this is one of those, it's a towering, it's a giant of a book, right? And it really makes you figure out how science came about, why is science important. A lot of people, especially today, struggle with trying to convince people that science is important. I mean, in 2018, you'd think that it would be easy, but it's difficult. But I mean, I could not think of a better book that sort of, puts it in. And for me, the last one is sort of this, this entire notion of understanding how the mind and how people work. And, it's The Twilight of the Idols, Friedrich Nietzsche. I know Nietzsche is somebody who has a very vast authorship, but I highly recommend The Twilight of the Idols. And, I took a course when I was in university, which was called the Structured Liberal Education, which made us read 4 books per week, all original stuff. It was an absolute intense thing. And I say, I got a 4-year liberal arts education in sort of 1 year. And what I love about Nietzsche is that no one does view and world breaking better than he does. And you could put every author on one side, and you have Friedrich Nietzsche, and the number of people who after reading his books, who are walking around confused because they no longer can understand their own morality, is amazing to watch. But that's important, because if you don't have that breakdown in structure, the questioning of who you are and why you're here, you're not going to evolve. And so that's why I put Twilight of the Idols, particularly as sort of the third book I recommend to anybody.
Super. In fact, I have not read 2 of these books that you recommended. I'm going to add this to my reading list. Amol, over to you, as in what would be your top recommendations for school leaders and teachers?
As I said, I'm pretty much Aditya on this as well. Very unpolished. I'm Punjabi. We don't have budgets for butter chicken. We have budgets for books. I like the Josie Bus. There's a series of books, very, very ready to use books for educators. I absolutely love them. They're for principals, they're for teachers, they're for substitute teachers, they're for subject matter experts. It's beautiful. I just absolutely love them. And I think it's something that it's just a plug and play for me as well. That's first. And second thing I like is one of my favorite authors is Brian Tracy. I mean, especially for personal productivity, how to get my work done, organize my life. I absolutely love reading his books. And as Roshan has said, audiobooks, I mean, I've got Brian Tracy's audiobooks as well. And especially I think audiobooks work very well when I'm driving, rather than just listening to the, and I'm going to quote Brian Tracy as well. For him, he says, listening to the music in the car is like having chewing gum. So if you want something healthy, you can do. And he did this analysis of, okay, if you're driving half an hour to work every day, 1 hour a day, in 365 days, or at least 250 days, you've got 250 hours of education. And the beauty with the audiobooks is that you can listen to them again and again. But and as Roshan said, one of the key things you have to be focused on is your attention as well, because at moments you get lost in your own thought and the book has moved ahead. You're like, wait, what? They're not going to pause. Okay, this guy is not paying attention, so let me pause and come back to me. It's not like your wife giving you a lecture, right, where she knows where you're not listening and she pauses. So the audiobook goes on and on. So I think that's where the drawback of an audiobook is. But otherwise, I think in terms of productivity, in terms of how you manage to learn while you go through your day, I think it's a beautiful tip that Roshan just shared, and I do it a lot, and especially with Brian Tracy. Yeah, so I recommend that to not only educators.
Amol, quick question. Sorry, what was the original book you said? I missed the first name.
Josie Bus. It's a series called the Josie Bus series. Jossey Bass. So it's a whole series of books.
Josie Bus. Thank you. Sorry, I could not hear the correct pronunciation over the line.
Sure.
Roshan, what are your topics?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think that's a dangerous question, particularly if you're making recommendations to teachers, because part of being a good teacher means being well informed about everything, being engaged with the world. So, specific recommendations. I mean, perhaps I would share Aditya's views. If you want to make specific recommendations, they should be kind of very foundational types of texts, like John Stuart Mill on Liberty. But otherwise, teachers should ideally be avid readers who are reading about from politics to history to psychology to anything that, and of course, plenty of classics and fiction, anything that keeps them abreast of developments and gives them an in-depth understanding of human nature and the modern world. Although I would single out perhaps one book which is specifically about teaching and about the teaching profession. It's by two authors who are prominent in the field of kind of education and pedagogy and educational leadership. They're called Andy Hargreaves and Michael Fullan. And they've written a book recently called Professional Capital, which really talks about the teaching profession and how to make the most out of being a teacher, and how, you know, the kind of social and human and decisional elements that make up good, successful teaching and school kind of middle leadership. Then in turn for school leaders, of course, perhaps business type books have a bad reputation because people think that, you know, reading business books is for MBA grads. It's very technical. It's about, you know, being in business, and you don't want to think about schools too much about as business. But actually, some of the kind of well-known business classics, I mean, what they really talk about is organizational culture, organizational vision, and that is something which is really quite crucial in for leading any organization, and particularly for leading a school. So even if the school is a non-profit organization, the same principles of vision and culture which come from the for-profit world are quite relevant. So in that sense, I would recommend some of the classic business books, like Jim Collins has written these two books, Built to Last and Good to Great. That's a great place to start. I very recently read a book on kind of culture within organizations called The Culture Code. It was only published a month or two back by a gentleman called Daniel Coyle, I think. So I would recommend that also.
Super. Lovely. So we are at 11:58 and we are going to do a quick open house Q&A with lots of questions which are flooding. Before that, just a quick checkout question for our open discussion, that as leaders, what is that one strategy that you may have used or wish to use to inspire reading in your organizations that you lead? So while you have a recommendation for your teams, I'm just wondering, what is that one or two strategy that you are using for inculcating reading in your teams which works with you?
Sure, I'll start off on that. You know, quite frankly, and you know, India is India, and well, you know, I spent a decade or more outside the country, and so, you know, I realize anything that you have to do for figuring out how to really inculcate these habits, your organizational culture has to incentivize it, and you know, that is something that it just has to be there. I am phenomenally disturbed, you know, that in 2018, if you ask most professionals in country, you know, what is their a yearly personal learning plan, the answer is, what's a learning plan? You know, where there's this entire notion that, you know, the organizations, and still, like I said, it's 2018, people still think that it's the organization's responsibility to train them to do that rather than seeking it out for themselves. And I think the tech world is a little bit different because of the, you know, the way technology is evolving. Professionals in the tech world end up having to learn on their own as well. But you know, that's fine. I think if people are willing to listen to what your organization wants them to learn, absolutely, I'll take that as a win. And you know, really figuring out how to incentivize people to read, to learn, is fantastic. And as businesses, you want people who are in the know, you want people with perspective, and you want people with skills. And getting them to sort of have a personal learning plan, for me, is the most important thing. I mean, one of the big questions which I ask anybody who I hire is, what do you read? And it's sad that 50% of the time that answer is, oh, I surf the internet. I don't actually have a reading. But just asking that, just telling them, look, no, it matters. You know, if you want to succeed in this organization, it matters that you read. It matters that you are continually keeping yourself updated. And particularly when it comes to teachers, I think it's phenomenally important that they lead by example. If you have a teacher who loves to read, that shows up in the classroom. They're recommending books, they are identifying students, they are giving them options, and I think as education professionals, all of us here should incentivize that behavior, and I think that's really, really important. Otherwise, to use a terrible term from education, teach to the test. If the test is if you read, you succeed, great, let's have that as part of the exam. Let's have part of that is that if you want to have a professional career in this area, you need to be able to read and you need to love to read. And so I'm a big supporter of incentives.
So, I pick two things from here. One, make it part of their incentive structure itself. And second, make it part of their work plan, growth plan, and hence the performance evaluation process itself. Amol, what would be your key strategies for inculcating reading in your team?
Yeah, I tried asking that question with what books are you reading, and I realized I would not end up hiring anybody in my office then. I'd be like a one-man office. I'd be a one-man organization. Then.
I asked it. I'm not happy with the answers.
Yeah, I'm surprised you got 50%. I'm like, gosh, I need to move my office to your area. So
usually people can remember something they read 2 years ago and lie about it. But yeah.
Yeah. So I stopped asking that question. I realized we don't read as well, and that's how we are brought up as a country. And we schools are to blame for that. We've never ever pushed kids to read beyond the textbook. And so what I do is, since I buy books a lot, I mean, I have a huge library in the office. So what I do is I use the same strategies I ask teachers to follow, that let's open the book, show them to see this is what's happening. And suddenly their eyes light up because they realize how they're going to benefit or how it would improve their productivity, their skill set. And suddenly they want to pick it up, and I say, okay, fine, let's get back to you. So I'm giving it and there are 4 or 5 books. I said, we choose which one you like, because I would have multiple books on the same topic. So for example, if you're designing a training module on, when kids are going to be coming to class the first week of school, what kind of ice-breaking activities are we going to design? So I have 3 or 4 books on that, and I let the person pick up the one that they like. I know I may have a personal opinion that, no, this book is better, but I'll not push it beyond a point and let them say, okay, at least take it over there, read it, and of course, supplement it with stuff that you read online as well. And then after 2 weeks, let's sit down again and see what you've done with it. So you have to nudge it a bit. If you just give a book to a person and say, okay, read it, I've done that as well. I've been naive enough to do that, and I get the book and it's perfectly clean. You can just see the book's not been read at all, and it's just given it back. Yes, sir, pad liya, sir. We are doing all this, sir. We're doing all this. The book's not even been read. How can you say you've been doing all this? So yeah, so you have to constantly nudge them, and again, just like a teacher, be a role model as well. And I think people look up to leaders in the organization as to what they're doing, and they want to emulate them. So that's a beautiful way when you're showing them that I'm going to be reading this book. I read this book, quote from that in your staff meetings as well. And I think that slowly gets them to say, okay, so can I get that book? I'm working on this subject. Could I have some resources? So now I see that increasingly more and more in my organization, where people come and say, sir, I'm stuck here. I would really like to have a book on this, rather than, earlier it was more of we'll surf online, we'll find what we can find on that. So yeah, that's where we are right now.
Super. So from Amol, what I pick is 2 things, inspiration and hope.
Sure.
Roshan, what are your top picks on strategy to inculcate reading in your teams?
Yeah. I mean, same experience for me as well when I'm recruiting people, and I always try to ask about reading. In fact, on our application form for jobs in our organization, we have a column for hobbies, and most people write reading. So I always pick up on that. I say, oh, you reading is your hobby, so what do you read? But they have nothing to say. Web surfing, or I don't know. And sometimes they pick up some book that they read 5 years ago or read as a kid. So it's sad. Personally, I was born and grew up abroad, and I grew up in the city of Cambridge and then studied in University of Oxford. So, always exposed to two kind of major centers of reading and learning. Contrasting that to coming to, a place like UP, it's completely the opposite. And, I'm maybe a little, I'm not too much of an optimist. I'm a bit of a realist. I think I'm with Amol that, you can't really force fully formed adults who are not in the reading habit to do a lot of reading. So I think the key thing to do is always to work with young people, to inspire that reading habit in younger people so that when they enter the job market, they will be lifelong readers and lifelong learners. Trying to work with someone who's already 40, 50 years old and trying to encourage them to do reading is a very difficult thing to do. The only thing that I do in my organization is kind of, if I notice that there are one or two people who read, I point them out and I make a positive example of them. And I let it be known I favor that and I appreciate that. So
super. That's
incentivized a little bit.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So we have just a little time for two questions maybe that I can take. We have 5 minutes to close. First is a question, maybe Roshan, you can take it up. This is a question from our friend Dheeraj, who's saying, don't you think audiobook is more like a teacher teaching in the classroom? I wish we must recommend normal books. How much of a concentration is required from the side of students in particular? So he's asking for audiobooks from the perspective of students.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, yeah, audiobooks are not a substitute for reading. They are something for very busy people who love to read, who already are in the reading habit, but who can't physically take out time to read, even with the best intentions. So it's not some substitute, it's not some solution. It's not the same thing as reading a book, because you take everything in. I disagree with the idea that it's like having a teacher teaching you, because you've got your headphones on, you're absorbed in it, you are personally into it. You can pause it, as Amol was saying, you can pause it and replay and rewind and re-listen to whatever you like, and with a good audiobook app, you can make bookmarks within the audiobook. You can keep going back to different. So it's very personalized. It's definitely not like having a teacher. But yeah, it's not a substitute for reading. You don't take in the depth of the detail. You are influenced by the reader of the audiobook as well. One of the wonderful things about reading is that a piece of fiction, for example, the whole imagination and the whole kind of way that you conceptualize the characters in your mind is up to you. It's your personal thing. Whereas if you do it from an audiobook, those perceptions are influenced by the voice and the way it's being read. So there are some drawbacks there. Audiobooks are not the kind of best, mainly for busy people. They're not a solution to reading. And young people, students, they should continue reading. They should master the art of reading physical books. And when it comes to books which are more complicated, which have more depth to them, non-fiction books which have a lot of facts, like history books or economic books or politics books, you do a physical book, really. Yeah.
So Dheeraj, if you're still there, he's completely aligned with you that for students, printed books and e-books are recommended and not audiobooks. We will.
Kavish, can I just add on to that? I think if you're looking at an audio solution to supplement the textbook, I think YouTube works better, where you have the video as well, and which prevents you from getting distracted. Audiobooks, it's very, very easy to get distracted. And for something audiobooks works well where it's okay if you miss out a few paragraphs, and still, there are points to be listened to. And okay, you've got out of 10, you've listened to 6, and you've retained 3 or 4. Good enough, you can listen to it again. But something as serious as a textbook for your curriculum, for your examination, you need to know every step of the way that the story builds on. And I think for that, you can just save a YouTube video offline, watch that, because that requires a full concentration. That video makes you focus. I think that's a better supplemental tool than an audiobook. And that's why I don't think we see too many audiobooks of textbooks in the market as well. It doesn't work. I don't think it's something that anyone would recommend.
Yeah.
Kavish, just very quickly, I do want to add a point here to extend the audiobooks. Funnily enough, this is the year where I am trying to actually start using audiobooks. So it's something which I completely agree with Roshan and Amol. It's definitely an add-on skill, and it's something which I'm now starting to experiment with. But I do want to also, since, there are educators here, there is a very small, limited population of people. And I have had friends, you in college who had these issues, who have genuine learning disabilities or special needs, who actually do a lot better with audiobooks than with reading actual books. And so particularly for students, I would sort of, reinforce what everybody else is saying. For Dheeraj is, look, the ideal is to read a actual book, but there are a subset of students with special needs. There are documented forms of dyslexia and such where reading is very, very hard for them, and they consume information better through audio and through visual. And I do for someone versus not reading and versus getting an audiobook, it's the last resort in my opinion, but it's something we should be conscious of as well. There are reasons why students don't read apart from societal circumstances. They may have something genuinely going on, and most education institutions are not equipped to handle that or to diagnose that. But the awareness is important.
Yeah, I'm mindful of time of the panelists and all the participants hooked onto the webinar. So I will still take one more question. There are lots of questions which are still there on my screen. Nikhil will help us open. This is a live question that we are getting. We are just going to unmute this participant to ask the question directly to the panelist. So we have somebody, we don't know the name, this person with the screen, SR Lab 10. Maybe there's, your audio is on mute. So if you're speaking something, please unmute first. So Dheeraj is there. So Dheeraj, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I would love to ask a question. My recommendation as a teacher is, I always tell them about the good books. But what about the subject expertise? How to ask them to study the reference books as such, particularly on grounds of achievements by individuals, or like the one of Malala and other Nobel Prize winners? So how to motivate these children? Because it comes to dilution of hardly 5% of the children who accept what the teachers say about a particular book. So what is the recommendation tone one should have in order to, motivate them to read books?
Any of you, if you wish to add to more inspiration to inculcate habits through teachers?
I think, okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So okay. No, the only thing what I would say is this. Look, reading is a very personal thing, right? And Dheeraj, we would all love, and I certainly have a long recommendation list which I give to people. And there are a lot of people who've given me long recommendation lists for books I've absolutely hated. So it's reading is a very personal experience, and I think more than anything, rather than specific books that we love, just because I love a book doesn't mean everybody will love a book. My book has the book I wrote has a 300-400 review on Goodreads at a 3.5, and I have 5-star ratings and I have 1-star ratings. I have people who literally sent me an email saying, you wasted 2 days of my life because I read your book. And I have people who said, look, this was a fundamentally transformative experience. I was like, it was not meant to transform you, but sure, I'll take it. So part of the entire thing is to offer them options, is to continuously say, look, read this, yes, you like horror, trashy novel stories, but here's something else that you might enjoy. But keep at it, give them options, give them for them to find some things. And, like I said, I'm the broken record on getting people to read original texts, because I think that's a fundamentally important thing for students. But, there are a lot, for example, for students, and I hate to say this, but I rarely recommend literary authors. because it's very difficult for a student to transition from, reading, the Nancy Drews or the Hardy Boys to suddenly read Salman Rushdie. It's a big step. It's great if it takes, but that's part of it, is giving them options, giving them a stepped ladder to what they go. You can't go from 0 to 100 in one go, and respecting their personal preferences. At the end of the day, I'd rather have a happy reader than an unhappy person who's reading books they don't like.
Super, love it. Amol, do you wish to add? And then
yeah. On the same lines, I think the key is that the teacher should come with variety. I mean, you cannot talk about and inspire them. Children are naturally curious, even the older lot. I mean, if you talk about this book, do you know where the author was coming from? What was his background? Suddenly the kid wants to know more. Everybody would want to know more. But again, don't force it upon them. The next day you can come with something else. Don't expect them. But one tip I'd like to leave you on this is, don't tell them what to read. That's the thing that kids hate. Now, don't make a textbook out of it. Don't put it in your syllabus. Don't make it a part of the summer holiday homework that you have to finish this book. They'll hate you for that. I mean, okay, they'll try and find some summary on Wikipedia and copy for your book report that you want them to do. That's not the whole idea. The idea is to make them fall in love with learning. I mean, just like Roshan said, that you get this odd book where you can't wait to get home and read it again. You fall in love with that book. You want. It's like that love that you have in your teenage years. That's how you feel about books. That's what you want these kids to experience. And it's not going to come from saying that, okay, fine, you go and read this book because I have told you to. They'll hate you for it. That puts them even away from reading what we want. So the idea is give them a variety of options. I mean, you can start them off by, even if it means watching the Avengers movie and then saying, let's watch, watching read the book about it as well as a follow-up. Just get them to start reading. And I'm okay with it. If Aditya feels that the jump is too big, I'm okay with kids reading Nancy Drew for now. And because right now where we are in India, we basically, apart from newspapers as a population, we don't read anything right now. And if you ask people read them, as Roshan said, I read Facebook, I read newspapers, and there's no answer beyond that. So just offer them variety, get them, ignite their curiousness and inspire them to take it up. And I think I'm sure you'll see those benefits. And as Roshan said, use those best practices. Let kid come in. It's one thing for you to say as a teacher that this is a good book, but a child telling the others without revealing the spoilers that this is what he's learned, this is what the plot was about. I think even peer-to-peer inspiration would work very well in schools as well.
Super. So we are going to close the session now with Roshan. Roshan, we have spent 80 minutes together. If there's something that you would love to share as a closing remark for this, on behalf of the panelists, I'm just taking the liberty to have Roshan close the panel.
Thank you very much. Well, it's been a real pleasure. I think I can speak for all of us that we've really enjoyed being here discussing reading. So thank you so much for bringing this panel together and inviting us to discuss. If I have a last word, I suppose in an ideal world, everyone would be inspired to read. They'd have the joy of reading. They would choose to read. Of course, in India, at least, we've got a long way before we achieve that well. And the step in between that I feel to be there is a kind of systemic recognition of the value of reading. And that will come if reading is systemically rewarded. What I mean by that is, for example, when it comes to university admissions, what they're looking for is top marks. Whereas if you go to a Western country, if you try to apply to any university in the UK or the US, in people who read. So that's incentivized, that reading is incentivized right at the system level. It means that reading is a necessary part. Now I'm seeing small baby steps in that direction in India, because 2 weeks ago, some of the liberal arts colleges, the new ones like Ashoka, Apeejay, made an announcement that they would be recognizing the American SAT results instead of the CBSE and ICSE board results. Now that's a very significant step, because the SAT, the type of questions are far more analytical, and the people who do well in that kind of thing are the people who do well in reading. So you see there that reading is kind of systemically incentivized. So people initially are forced to get into reading, and then that way they will get into reading. So I want to see more of that.
Thank you so much, Roshan, for an incredible closure to the session. I couldn't have chosen better words to close the session. To all the participants out there, we have got not less 50 questions unanswered. As Stones to Milestones, we take the responsibility to send across the answers across to you shortly after the session is over. And once again, our heartful gratitude to all three of you. A big, big thanks for inspiring, sharing strategies, and there could be nothing better than this experience for us at Stones to Milestones. So thank you, Amol, Aditya, Roshan, for taking out the time. It was lovely seeing you here.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Bye to everyone out here. Thank you.